I moved into the house on Sycamore Ridge nearly 15 years ago. Back then, the neighborhood was barely more than a whisper of what it is now. A few scattered homes, open sky, and long drives down dusty back roads that kept the noise of the world at bay. I had been looking for peace, real peace, the kind that does not come with streetlights humming outside your bedroom window or traffic murmuring from a few blocks over. I was a retired civil engineer with nothing left to prove and everything to reclaim after the death of my wife. This land, this home, and the water beneath it were mine, and I protected it like a sacred oath. The well was already here when I bought the place, a deep artesian structure, old but reliable. The original owner had it drilled decades before the HOA even existed. He handed over all the records, geological surveys, county permits, water testing certificates. I kept them neatly in a file cabinet in my garage, never once thinking I would need to defend the right to draw water from beneath my own feet. That well did not just keep my faucets flowing. It symbolized everything I valued: self-reliance, sustainability, and a little bit of quiet defiance. By the time the Homeowners Association had fully formed 5 years later, the neighborhood had transformed into something unrecognizable. Cookie-cutter houses began to spring up in tight rows, each with manicured lawns that looked more like AstroTurf than real earth. Newcomers arrived with Tesla's golden retrievers and a fixation on uniform mailboxes. The HOA board was elected before I even knew it was happening. It was not long before I started getting their glossy newsletters filled with cheery updates, upcoming community picnics, and bold-faced reminders about compliance. At first, they left me alone. I was that guy on the edge of the neighborhood, the one with solar panels on the roof and no lawn to mow. They probably thought I was just a grumpy old man tucked away behind his hedges and gravel driveway, which admittedly I was. But I paid my dues, minimal as they were, and did not complain when they asked me to trim the native shrubs by the street corner or paint the fence a more community-friendly shade of beige. I picked my battles, until they picked one with me. The first real confrontation did not come with sirens or lawsuits. It came with silence. I started noticing that the board members would avoid eye contact when they walked their dogs past my home. One afternoon, I caught the HOA president, Randall Stokes, standing across the street taking photos of my front yard with his phone. I stepped outside and waved, but he quickly turned away, muttering something about routine documentation. That was the first warning sign. Then, early one Monday morning, I opened my mailbox and saw it, a formal letter printed on thick paper with the HOA logo stamped in raised ink. The kind of letter that feels heavier than its weight. I opened it on the porch with a hot cup of coffee trembling slightly in my hand. Dear Mr. Harlan, it has come to the attention of the Sycamore Ridge HOA board that your property includes an unauthorized private water source, i.e., a personal well that may violate municipal water code standards and poses a potential hazard to neighborhood infrastructure and water equity. Effective within 30 days of this notice, you are required to cease use of the private well and connect your home to the approved municipal water grid. Non-compliance may result in daily fines, legal action, or both. Sincerely, the Sycamore Ridge HOA Board of Directors. I read it twice before I laughed out loud, just once sharply, then stared at it again in disbelief. Water equity, hazard to infrastructure. I could not tell if they were being ignorant or manipulative, maybe both. My well had been legally permitted since the 80s. It predated the subdivision, the HOA, and even the modern water line that the rest of the neighborhood used. And ironically, I knew exactly where that line ran because I helped install it back in my working days. Still, I was not stupid enough to just ignore it. I went straight into the garage, found the battered old file cabinet, and pulled out everything: the drilling permits, the geological studies, the maintenance logs, even the original easement document that showed my right to access groundwater on this parcel in perpetuity. I laid them out on my kitchen table like a war map. They wanted to pick a fight. Maybe they thought I would roll over too tired or too old to push back. Maybe they thought I did not know the law. But I had built half the water systems in this part of the county before most of the board members had finished high school. I was not just going to defend my right to that well, I was going to make damn sure they regretted ever trying to take it from me. What they did not know, what no one seemed to know, was that the HOA had made a crucial error years ago. See, in their rush to expand, they had unknowingly tapped into an underground branch of my well system. It had started as a community-friendly agreement between the original owner and a few of the early neighbors supplying water during droughts or shortages. But over the years, the pipes had stayed connected, quiet, hidden, forgotten. Until now. That night, I sat on the porch in the dark, sipping another cup of coffee, listening to the soft hum of the windmill that powered the well pump. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Somewhere down below, the aquifer flowed steady and deep as it always had. They thought they were targeting just one old man's water. But soon they would realize they were threatening their own. The second letter arrived 2 weeks after the first, this time hand-delivered by a smug young man in a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. He did not introduce himself, just rang the bell, shoved the envelope into my hand, and walked off without a word. I stood there in my doorway barefoot, on the concrete, watching him saunter down my driveway like he had just handed me a court summons. Inside the envelope was a final notice before enforcement. Same branding, same legalese. This time, though, the language was sharper, more aggressive. They cited vague Section 14B of Community Environmental Safety Compliance and claimed I had failed to submit documentation proving that my well met modern filtration and distribution standards. Modern filtration, the same well that had passed county inspection 3 years ago, the same well with lab-tested purity levels better than bottled water. This was harassment, plain and simple. Worse yet, it was not just about me anymore. The HOA was pushing hard too hard, and I began to suspect they had something bigger in motion. That night, I pulled out the HOA bylaws, the thick manual that most residents never bother reading. I sat at my dining room table with a red pen, a yellow highlighter, and a stiff glass of bourbon. After a couple hours and several curses under my breath, it became obvious there was nothing in their charter granting them the authority to dictate water usage on lots that were grandfathered in before the HOA's incorporation. My property was carved from an original homestead that dated back over 70 years. The well was documented in the original county records and even listed as a registered utility under my address. I called the county office the next morning and spoke to a clerk named Diane, someone I remembered from back in my civil engineering days. She remembered me too, which helped. I asked her to pull the records for Sycamore Ridge and the parcels attached to my lot. 30 minutes later, she called back, slightly breathless. "You're not going to believe this, Mr. Harlan," she said. "Looks like your well is still listed as the source for several auxiliary lines connected to early development parcels, mostly the ones near the eastern ridge." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean, connected?" "I mean the pipes were never officially decommissioned. Back when the neighborhood started expanding, they must have tied into your system temporarily and just left it that way. I do not think even the city knows." It clicked in an instant. I had suspected the HOA's reach exceeded their grasp, but this was a full-blown oversight, maybe even illegal. They had been pulling water from a private source for years, probably without knowing, or maybe worse, choosing not to know. And now they were trying to cut it off because someone finally realized what they had done. I asked her to send over the parcel maps and the old development permits. Within an hour, I had them printed out and spread across my garage workbench. I traced the lines with a grease pencil the original connections, the branching pipes that led toward a half-dozen houses built in the early phase of development. It was not just me. It was not just my well. This was a shared system, and I was at the root of it. The next day, I attended the HOA's monthly board meeting. I had not gone to one in years. They held them at the clubhouse, a faux colonial building next to the tennis courts, complete with chandeliers and bad coffee. The room buzzed with the same performative cordiality I remembered from my younger days in city planning, people pretending not to hate each other while secretly calculating how to get their way. When I walked in, heads turned. A few people looked surprised. One woman leaned over and whispered something to her friend, who immediately glanced down at my boots and flannel shirt like I had tracked mud into their country club fantasy. I waited patiently through the budget updates and landscaping complaints. When the floor opened for community concerns, I stood and cleared my throat. "My name's Thomas Harlan, Lot 17. I received 2 letters demanding I shut down my well. I'm here to ask on what authority." The room went still. Randall Stokes, the HOA president, adjusted his tie like it might strangle him. Mr. Harlan, thank you for attending. We are simply enforcing compliance with environmental and safety standards. Is that right? I said, pulling the folder from under my arm and laying it on the table before him. Because what I see here is an attempt to shut down a fully permitted, legally compliant well that predates your HOA by 3 decades. He did not respond immediately. His eyes scanned the documents, his jaw twitching. I continued. And what's more, your own water lines trace back to connections made illegally, or at best, without formal permits. Connections that still draw from my wellhead. A murmur rolled through the room. One board member, a woman in her 30s with a sharp bob and too much perfume, leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Mr. Harlan? I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you, I replied. You've been drawing water from a private source for years, either by mistake or by deliberate oversight. And now that someone's noticed, you're trying to cover your tracks by shutting me down. Stokes' face was flushed now. That's a serious accusation. I have maps, permits, city documentation. Want to see more? He did not. No one did. I walked out of that meeting with a strange sense of calm. Not because I had won anything, not yet, but because I had finally watched the realization bloom across their faces. The HOA was not fighting me. They were digging a hole blind to the fact that I had been the one keeping their water running all this time. I knew they would not back down without a fight. Pride never does. But now they had to weigh their options, and I had just shifted the scales. By the following week, I had stopped receiving letters from the HOA. No calls. No further threats. Silence again, but not the kind that brings peace. This was a colder kind of quiet, the kind that hangs in the air just before a storm. And I knew better than to think the board had backed off. No, they were regrouping, rerouting. People like Randall Stokes did not yield, they recalculated. The proof came in whispers. A neighbor, James Myers, who lived 2 streets down and worked in real estate, stopped me while I was hauling compost into my garden beds. You didn't hear this from me, he muttered, looking around like someone might be hiding in the hydrangeas. But the board's been holding private meetings. Off the books. Not in the clubhouse. Where I asked. Randall's house, every few nights. And they brought in someone from a private utilities firm last Thursday. Guy in a suit. Real serious. I stared at him. What kind of utilities firm? James lowered his voice further. Water infrastructure. Word is they want to install a separate line for the entire neighborhood, get everyone off the existing system, including you. There it was, the real game. This was not about safety or compliance. It was about control. Water was not just a utility, it was power. If they could tie the whole community to a vendor they controlled, they could charge fees, impose penalties, rake in a cut of the revenue under the guise of maintenance. My well was not just inconvenient, it was a threat to their plan. And they would rather pretend it was a hazard than admit it made their scheme unprofitable. But they had a problem, a big one. The system they were trying to escape was still partially fed by my well, which they had no legal claim to. Cutting it off meant cutting off their own supply, unless they could complete their new system before that happened. But even then, the infrastructure was not built for a neighborhood-wide switch. Not without permits. Not without city oversight. I needed to know how far they had gotten, so I made a few calls. An old buddy of mine from my days working infrastructure, Mark Caldwell, still worked with the county water department. I bought him lunch at a greasy spoon diner off Route 23 and slid the file folder across the table. They're trying to push me off my own, well, I said. And I think they're building something they haven't registered. Mark flipped through the paper slowly, then leaned back and let out a long breath. You weren't kidding. You seen any permit requests from Sycamore Ridge? I asked. He shook his head. Nothing. Not a single utility expansion request in the last 2 years. Which means if they're building something, it's off record. That's illegal. Especially if it crosses private property or ties into municipal infrastructure. I felt my jaw clench. This was bigger than neighborhood politics. They were playing fast and loose with county code. And if someone did not stop them, they would bury their mistake under concrete and contracts. Mark agreed to do some quiet digging. Meanwhile, I kept my eyes open. I noticed stakes in the ground near the eastern trail, new ones with bright orange flags. The kind surveyors use. I took photos and marked the coordinates. A few days later, I spotted a construction crew, unmarked trucks guys, in high-vis vests, walking the property line between my lot and the HOA Greenbelt. One of them carried blueprints. I approached calmly, hands in my pockets. "Morning," I said. "Y'all lost." They glanced up wary. One guy, older, probably the foreman, cleared his throat. "Just surveying, sir." For what, I asked. "Because this here's my land beyond the old fence line. You're standing on it." He looked confused, then glanced at his papers. "Says this is common area." It's not. That fence was moved after a landslide 5 years ago. Original boundary is 20 feet east my side. You're trespassing." He muttered an apology and signaled for the crew to move. But not before I saw the header on the blueprint in his hands. Phase 1 Alternative Utility Routing. Sycamore Ridge Expansion. They were already building. Back home, I pulled out my survey records, dated and sealed, along with aerial photos from a decade ago, showing the original property lines. I scanned everything and emailed it to Mark. I told him the crew had crossed the line. He promised to escalate it quietly through internal channels. 2 nights later, I heard the HOA was hosting an invite-only meeting at Randall's house, strictly for homeowners with homes built post-Phase 2. In other words, everyone who had arrived after the well had already been quietly feeding their pipes. I was not invited, of course, but James was, and James had a good memory. "They're spinning a whole story," he told me the next morning, "claiming you're a liability. That the well's contamination risk could affect property values. That you're hoarding resources." "Contamination," I barked. "That well has tested cleaner than half the city's water." "They don't care, Tom. They're using fear." They showed photos of rusted pipes, old stock images, not even yours. People bought it. I heard a woman suggest you be forcibly removed from the HOA entirely. It was a smear campaign, not against my well, against me. That night, I stood in my garage staring at the water pressure gauges humming gently on the wall. I had installed a passive monitor a few years back, part hobby, part necessity, and it told me more than they realized. I knew exactly how much water flowed through my system each day, and I knew just from the recent spike that someone somewhere was drawing far more than usual. I pulled the reports, ran the calculations, then stared at the numbers. There was no question anymore. They were still using my water. I made a decision then and there. If they wanted a fight, it would be a fair one. Legal. Precise. But I was not going to play defense anymore. I was going to show them that the foundation they were building, literally and figuratively, rested on something they did not understand, and I was about to shake it. I did not sleep much that night. I stayed in the garage, surrounded by the hum of old tools and the quiet drip of the condensation tank beside my pressure system. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I pulled out a dusty PVC roll tucked behind a set of broken gardening shears. It was stiff from age, yellowed around the edges, but when I unrolled it across my workbench, it revealed exactly what I needed: the original layout of the well infrastructure, drawn by hand, dated 1986, and stamped by the county water department with my name on the file. It was more than just piping schematics. It was a map of every auxiliary line that branched off the main conduit lines that back in the day had been installed as temporary solutions for early housing during water shortages. The HOA either did not know about them or pretended not to. I followed the markings with my finger, tracing the network that fanned out beneath the very streets of Sycamore Ridge. 6 homes in particular still had active valve connections, never decommissioned, still functional. Most belonged to HOA board members. I cross-referenced the addresses, noted the water usage spikes from my monitoring system, and began logging the data. My system was not just serving my home, it was carrying their morning showers, their dishwashing, their lawn sprinklers, and now they were trying to rip it out from under me. I thought about letting them try. Let them sever the line and see what happened when their faucets ran dry. But I was not interested in revenge. Not yet. I needed proof. So I installed a second flow meter hidden under the gravel along the old pipe route that ran toward the eastern edge of the neighborhood. It was not exactly legal to monitor someone else's water consumption, but technically, it was still my system. Every drop that passed through that pipe originated from my well. I had the records. The meter confirmed my suspicion: regular daily flows, peaking at 6 a.m., 12 p.m., and 7 p.m., perfectly in line with household use. I took the data, organized it into a report, and drove down to the county water office in person. Mark met me behind the building, away from the front desk, where HOA members could wander in and overhear. "Holy hell," he said, flipping through the binder I handed him. They're still pulling from you, and they don't even know it, I said. Or maybe they do. Either way, they're pushing for a system overhaul without knowing where their current one starts. He ran a hand down his face. This is a legal minefield. If they disconnect the wrong thing, they could contaminate the entire flow path or worse, cause a backflow event. And if anyone gets sick, they'll blame me, I finished. That's why I'm here. I want it on the record that I've warned them, that I've documented the connections, the flow rates, the exact households using the system. If they continue, the liability won't be on me. Mark nodded solemnly. I'll file a report, quietly. But you may want to consult legal counsel. The HOA won't go down easy. I had already reached out to someone. Samantha Rhodes, former litigator, now semi-retired, who ran a private legal advisory firm that specialized in property rights and utility disputes. She was sharp, no nonsense, and she owed me a favor. I sent her the same documentation I gave Mark and asked for a formal letter outlining my rights under local utility codes, historical property exceptions, and service easements. 2 days later, I received a call from Randall Stokes. Mr. Harlan, he said, voice tight, like the words scraped his throat. We'd like to invite you to a private board session to discuss your well situation. I smiled, though he could not see it. I thought I wasn't welcome at your closed-door meetings. A pause. We believe it's best to resolve this amicably. Amicably. The word tasted fake. I'll attend, I said, but I'll be bringing legal counsel. The session was set for the following Friday in the HOA clubhouse. When I walked in with Samantha beside me, briefcase in hand, you could have heard a pin drop. The board sat in stiff chairs around a U-shaped table. No refreshments this time. No fake smiles. Randall did not stand to greet us. Thank you for coming, he said tersely. Samantha opened her case, slid several folders across the table, and folded her hands. Mr. Harlan's position is clear. The well is legally registered. Its connections to current neighborhood infrastructure, if not acknowledged by your development plans, are your oversight, not his liability. One of the board members, a wiry man named Jeff with sweat stains spreading under his collar, leaned forward. But this isn't sustainable. The community needs modernization. We're not saying he can't keep the well. We're just saying it needs to be isolated. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Isolated, as in severed. Randall interjected, as in disconnected from the neighborhood grid. We've already begun coordinating with a private contractor. And have you filed the proper construction and excavation permits? She asked, her voice sharp and surgical. Silence. You do realize, she continued, that interfering with a registered utility, especially one not under your ownership, could be classified as criminal tampering, not to mention potential violations of the Public Utility Commission statutes regarding shared service disruption. Randall fidgeted. We weren't aware of the active connection. That's not a defense, she said flatly. That's negligence. They did not know what to say. They had walked into that room thinking I would fold under pressure, or maybe compromise. But I had come armed with facts law, and someone who knew how to wield them. The silence dragged. You have two options, Samantha concluded. Cease any further attempts to interfere with the well and begin working in good faith to establish a proper service map, or continue this path and face a formal complaint to the Public Utility Commission, the County Planning Department, and Civil Court. No one moved. Randall's face was pale now. I believe we're done here, she said. We stood, gathered our things, and walked out. I did not look back. But I knew from the tension in that room that something had shifted. They were not just dealing with a stubborn old man anymore. They were dealing with the truth and the law, and both were on my side. The HOA board meeting was just the opening salvo. I knew better than to assume they would give up so easily. People like Randall Stokes did not retreat because they were outmatched. They regrouped because they did not like being embarrassed. And I had embarrassed him. In front of his board. In front of his carefully curated power structure. I expected blowback, but what I did not expect was how quickly it came and how public it got. 3 days after the clubhouse confrontation, I received an email from the HOA's Community Safety Subcommittee, a name that sounded more like a Cold War spy unit than a neighborhood group. The message was short, deliberately vague, but carried a weight of menace. As per board directive, the HOA is currently conducting a comprehensive infrastructure audit to ensure all utilities meet safety standards. Access to common grounds adjacent to Lot 17 may be required in the coming days. Access. That was their word for trespassing. I forwarded the email to Samantha, who replied instantly. They touch anything on your parcel without permit or warrant. We file immediately. But then something unexpected happened. Someone else came forward. Her name was Dana Suarez, and she lived 3 doors down from the HOA president. I had only spoken to her once or twice in passing, usually when she was walking her twins or unloading groceries, but this time she showed up on my porch with a printed copy of the HOA newsletter and a determined look on her face. You need to see this, she said. In the center column, under the cheery header, Water Worries and Community Wellness, was an entire article about unauthorized water systems, complete with warnings about potential contaminants, soil seepage, and unregulated wells that could compromise neighborhood health and safety. There was even a photo zoomed in and grainy but unmistakably my property. This is about you, isn't it? Dana asked. They're trying to poison the well metaphorically before they try to shut it down literally, I said. Classic disinformation play. She looked over her shoulder. I'm not on the board, but I've been to enough meetings to know they're hiding something. They mentioned a utilities firm, something about a contract, but nobody got to vote on it. They've gone quiet about costs, too. She paused, lowering her voice. I think they're planning to use HOA funds to pay for a new system, but they haven't disclosed the amount. I thanked her and asked if she would be willing to speak at the next public meeting. She hesitated, then nodded. If you'll be there too. We did not have to wait long. The following Thursday, the city hosted its monthly town hall meeting open to all residents. The HOA usually avoided these too public, too much risk of exposure. But this time, Randall had placed a line item on the agenda, HOA utility concerns and water modernization initiative. I sat in the second row. Samantha was beside me. Dana sat behind a few pages of notes clutched in her hand. The room was not full, but it was busy enough for residents from the neighborhood city officials and even a reporter from the county ledger, probably tipped off by someone who wanted to cause a stir. When Randall stepped up to the microphone, he wore his best politician's smile. Good evening, everyone. As many of you know, the Sycamore Ridge community is in the process of reviewing our water infrastructure to ensure it aligns with modern standards. Our goal is safety efficiency and long-term sustainability. He spoke like he was unveiling a new playground, not a clandestine effort to seize control of privately owned utilities. There were a few nods from the audience. He continued. Unfortunately, we've encountered a few outlier systems that pose potential hazards, non-compliant wells, undocumented piping, aging equipment. I stood. Care to name names, Randall? He froze. The crowd turned. I stepped into the aisle, my voice steady but loud enough to carry. You're talking about me, aren't you? The non-compliant. Well, that your own board has been drawing water from for years. Randall blinked, caught off guard. This isn't the proper forum. No, I think it is, I cut in. This is exactly the forum. You want transparency? Let's be transparent. I turned to the audience. My name is Thomas Harlan. I live on Lot 17. I've been in Sycamore Ridge longer than the HOAs existed. My well was drilled legally in 1986. I have the permits, the inspections, and the documentation. What I also have, thanks to some careful monitoring, is proof that the HOA infrastructure still draws from my well. I've brought the records, flow rate logs, distribution maps, historical utility overlays, and I can tell you right now, 6 homes, including 3 owned by current board members, are receiving water that flows through my system. The room broke into murmurs. One man turned to his wife with wide eyes. Dana stood next. I can confirm that none of the board's recent plans were put to a community vote, she said. They've spent HOA funds without approval. They've pushed fear-based messaging through the newsletter, and they've tried to intimidate homeowners who ask too many questions. Another woman near the back raised her hand. Wait, are you saying the HOA has been using someone else's water without permission? I nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. Randall stepped forward, but the mayor interrupted him. Mr. Harlan, she said, would you be willing to submit your documentation for public record? Yes, I replied, gladly. Randall tried to recover, but the tone had shifted. His confident smile was gone. What replaced it was something more uncertain, even nervous. For the first time, the board was not operating behind closed doors. The crowd was no longer nodding along. They were questioning, watching. And I knew without threats, without lawsuits, without drama, I had struck the first real blow. The truth was no longer hidden under their feet. It was out in the open now, flowing loud and clear. 3 days after the town hall meeting, someone cut the lock on my back gate. It was not random vandalism. The bolt was sheared clean through, too precise for kids messing around and too silent for a robbery. Nothing was stolen, but I found fresh boot prints in the gravel behind the wellhead and a set of long, thin tire marks near the maintenance road right where my truck never went. I followed the prints by flashlight that night, my dog Jasper staying close to my side. They led straight to the pump shed, then circled back toward the fence that bordered the green belt. Inside the shed, I found what I feared: the control panel had been tampered with. The casing was dented, the cover plate screws had been stripped, and the wiring inside the very guts of my pump control system had been pulled loose and jammed back in just enough to avoid detection unless you knew what to look for. It was clumsy, rushed, and stupidly dangerous. Had I not checked it in time, it could have shorted the system or sent a power surge down the backup line, destroying the main pump, or worse, starting an electrical fire. I spent the rest of the night carefully rewiring it, one terminal at a time, cursing softly under my breath as my knuckles scraped against rusted brackets and sharp metal. When I was done, I installed a new lock, commercial-grade reinforced steel, and added a solar-powered security camera over the shed door. I had been passive long enough. The next morning, I filed a report with the county sheriff's office. The deputy, an older guy named Murphy, who knew my reputation from back in my engineering days, took it seriously. He photographed the tampering, measured the footprints, and took my statement. "You think the HOA's behind this?" he asked, not bothering to hide the skepticism in his tone. "I think someone who doesn't want the truth about that water system getting out is behind this," I said. "And I think the timing is a little too convenient to be a coincidence." He nodded slowly. "We'll keep an eye on it. But unless we catch someone in the act, it's trespassing and vandalism. Nothing we can prove belongs to anyone specific." He left with a copy of the surveillance footage, what little there was. The intruder had avoided the older cameras and struck just before dawn, before the new system was fully online. But they would be back. Of that I was sure. By the end of the week, things got worse. The board sent out an email to the entire HOA community titled Water Source Safety Update. It was filled with carefully worded nonsense about recent incidents involving unauthorized infrastructure and safety threats that necessitated board-level intervention. They even claimed to have secured the area in the interest of public health. I was not named, but everyone knew. My phone buzzed constantly, neighbors asking questions, some out of curiosity, others with thinly veiled hostility. One man, Greg from Lot 23, came right up to me during my morning walk and asked if I was poisoning the neighborhood on purpose. I told him to check his facts before he accused someone with more knowledge of civil water systems than the entire board combined. But not all the feedback was negative. Dana stopped by again this time, with 3 more residents, people I did not know well, but who had lived in Sycamore Ridge long enough to smell something off. They wanted to help. I gave them copies of the maps and explained what the board was trying to do: cut me out, cover their mistake, and implement a privatized system that would hike fees and eliminate any trace of their dependency on my well. "We're not going to let them get away with this," Dana said. "If they'll sabotage a pump, they'll do worse. We need to expose them, and soon." I decided it was time to go public, not just with words, but with evidence. I contacted the local news station. The same reporter who had been at the town hall, Emily Tran, called me back within the hour. She came by that afternoon with a cameraman. I walked her through the history, the well's legal status, the flow data, the town hall confrontation, and finally, the sabotage. They filmed everything: the wellhead, the dented casing, the prints in the dirt. Emily asked sharp questions, and I answered them without flinching. By the time they left, I could tell they had a story. And that story aired the next night at 6 p.m. with the headline: "Neighborhood HOA accused of sabotaging private water source is a cover-up underway." It hit harder than I expected. Within 24 hours, I had 2 calls from attorneys, one representing a family who suspected their infant's recent illness might be linked to water fluctuations, and another representing a construction firm who claimed they had been hired to lay down new pipework for Sycamore Ridge, without being told it would cross private property. The second one got my attention. I met with that firm's foreman in the diner off Route 23, same place I had met Mark from the county office. The man, broad shoulders, sun-scorched skin. Rough hands unrolled a set of blueprints that made my blood run cold. These were the plans we were given, he said. We were told the easements were cleared, that everything was signed off. But when I saw your name on that parcel, I pulled my guys back. There it was, plain as day. The proposed routing ran straight through my parcel, inches from the well. They had planned to dig lay pipe and bypass me altogether, while pretending it was all part of some community upgrade. He handed me a signed work order. On the bottom corner, a signature, Randall Stokes. That night, I wrote a letter not to Randall, not to the board, but to every homeowner in Sycamore Ridge. I printed 50 copies, sealed them in envelopes, and delivered them myself, mailbox by mailbox. Inside was a copy of the blueprint, a snapshot of the pump sabotage, a timeline of the unauthorized use of my well, and a link to the broadcast footage. At the bottom, I included one final sentence. If your water stopped flowing tomorrow, would you know where it came from and who really kept it running all these years? The next morning, a neighbor knocked on my door. She did not say much, just handed me a folded sheet of paper and whispered, "You're not alone." Inside were 13 signatures, 13 households, and the words, "We demand an independent audit of HOA utility planning and expenditures." The tide was turning, but the board had not played their last card yet. It happened on a Tuesday. I was out back pruning the fig trees when I heard the sound of panic, a loud "What the hell" from over the fence, followed by the distinct clatter of a metal garden hose being dropped onto concrete. A second voice, higher pitched, called out, "The water's not working." Then another from farther down the road echoed the same cry, "Ours too. Nothing's coming out." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked toward the street. People were stepping outside, waving their arms, peering into hose spouts and kitchen taps like maybe, just maybe, it was a fluke. I spotted Randall's wife pacing barefoot across her lawn, a cell phone clutched to her ear, her mouth tight with frustration. The HOA's water system had gone dry. I did not need to check my gauges to know what had happened. I had been watching the pressure drop for 2 days now, slowly, steadily, as a hidden leak crept through their unlicensed bypass system. Likely installed in a rush with no county oversight, it had finally given out. And since they had quietly switched over without fully disconnecting from my lines, their backup valves had not been pressurized properly, which meant their new system was not ready, and their old one had just failed. I stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, and watched the realization spread across the neighborhood like a slow-moving wildfire. Greg from Lot 23 sprinted past me, headed straight for Randall's house. Dana Suarez emerged from her garage with a clipboard and a look of grim satisfaction. And within minutes, 2 maintenance trucks, both unmarked but all too familiar, came roaring down Sycamore Ridge Drive and screeched to a halt near the utility box behind the clubhouse. They were met by a crowd, not just angry residents demanding answers, but questions. Sharp, inconvenient, unavoidable questions. Who authorized the switch? Why weren't they told? Why was the HOA still drawing water from a private well that they claimed was unsafe? And where exactly had their dues been going, if not toward real infrastructure? I walked back into my house and turned on my own tap. Clear cold water poured into the sink. I did not gloat, not aloud anyway. But I took a long, slow drink and felt something in my chest loosen. Not victory yet, but vindication. The lies were unraveling, and I did not have to raise my voice to prove it. The truth had flowed out on its own. By noon, I got a call from Emily Tran at the County Ledger. "We've got a dozen residents reporting zero water pressure," she said. "And now the HOA's claiming it's a temporary citywide outage. Care to comment?" I laughed. "You can quote me on this, it's not the city. It's the board. And they've been playing with pipes they don't own and don't understand." That night, the story hit every major local outlet. HOA water crisis, residents left dry after unauthorized system fails. Photos of dry lawns, residents carrying jugs of water from their cars, and one grainy screenshot of the blueprint I had leaked earlier. Suddenly, the entire neighborhood was not just angry, they were humiliated. They were supposed to be part of an exclusive luxury community. Now they were hauling water like campers. The next emergency board meeting was called less than 24 hours later. This time it was not held in the clubhouse. It was held in the local middle school auditorium to accommodate the angry crowd. I sat in the front row, arms folded with Samantha beside me, and a thick file of documentation in my lap. Randall stood at the podium, paler than usual, his smile thin and mechanical. As many of you are aware, he began, we've experienced an unexpected service disruption due to unforeseen technical complications with our infrastructure transition. Call it what it is, someone shouted from the back. You broke it. We want answers, yelled another. Randall held up his hands. We're working with contractors to resolve the issue as quickly as possible. In the meantime, we've arranged for temporary water deliveries. Out of our own pockets, Dana stood now, voice strong. You never disclosed the cost of this project. You never put it to a vote. And now you're using HOA funds to fix a mess we didn't agree to. Applause rippled across the room. Dana turned to face the crowd. Mr. Harlan warned you. He showed you the permits, the blueprints, the flow reports. You ignored it. You tried to frame him as a hazard while relying on his system behind his back. A man in a business suit near the sidewall raised his hand. Excuse me, he said. I represent the County Utilities Commission. We were never notified of any permit applications for a secondary system in Sycamore Ridge. The room exploded. What followed was chaos, questions hurled from every direction, board members fumbling through binders and excuses. Randall looked like he was melting under the lights. When things calmed, Samantha stood. I'd like to propose that the board disclose all financial records related to infrastructure spending for the past 12 months, she said coolly. And I have here. She raised a folder, a preliminary injunction drafted for immediate filing if the board continues to obstruct access to utility service maps. It was a masterstroke. The residents cheered, several standing in support. The board had no choice. They adjourned the meeting early, promising transparency, emergency repairs, and a reevaluation of leadership structures, which in HOA speak meant Randall's days were numbered. I left that auditorium into a cool night breeze. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The system had failed, not mine, but theirs. And now everyone knew who had really been keeping the water flowing. The morning after the emergency board meeting, the HOA newsletter did not go out. No chirpy emails, no pastel-colored PDFs, no cheery subject lines like updates from the Ridge or community togetherness. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on the entire operation. Silence this time was not foreboding, it was admission. They had run out of spin. And by noon, the neighborhood's mood shifted from irritation to indignation. It started with water jugs. They lined the curbs in front of dozens of houses, plastic 5-gallon drums, and collapsible containers, all marked with masking tape and names scribbled in Sharpie. Residents had begun carpooling to nearby towns just to fill up for the day. A few houses borrowed from neighbors on the edge of the district homes still receiving city water, but tensions flared quickly. Everyone was tired. Everyone was embarrassed. I got a knock at my door around 2 p.m. It was Randall. He looked 10 pounds lighter than when I last saw him, sweat staining the collar of his button-down face, drawn and ruddy from stress. He did not have his clipboard. No HOA pin. Just a cheap ballpoint pen stuck behind his ear and a manila folder under his arm. Mr. Harlan, he said. I did not answer. I just leaned against the doorframe and waited. We need to talk. I don't think we do, I replied. He sighed. Please. I stepped aside and let him in, not out of kindness, but because I wanted him to sit in the same chair where I had read his first letter weeks ago. The one that threatened me with legal action. The one that nearly made me question whether I still belonged here. He looked around like he had never seen the inside of a real house before. His hands trembled as he set the folder down on the table. I didn't know, he said. About the water system, about how far it reached. Of course you didn't, I replied. You didn't ask. You decided you already knew everything. He did not argue. We hired contractors based on bids, he said. We trusted that the infrastructure maps were accurate, but they weren't. No, I said. Because the original maps are in that filing cabinet over there. And the county has copies. But no one on your board checked. He shifted in his seat. This has spiraled. The residents want heads. Financial disclosures recall votes. I've already had 2 board members resign. I did not flinch. I'm stepping down, he added quietly. I blinked. What? I'm resigning. Effective immediately. The board will appoint an interim president, and they'll start reviewing every line item from the past year, including the utility contracts. I stared at him, reading between the lines. He was not just scared. He was trying to get ahead of the investigation. A graceful exit before the real fallout hit. I didn't sabotage your well, he added. Did you authorize someone to, I asked. He hesitated just long enough to make the silence feel like an answer. I didn't know what they were doing, he finally said. I gave an order to isolate the lines. The contractors, they went beyond that. That's not a defense, I said. That's negligence, just like everything else. He nodded, eyes cast downward. From the folder, he pulled a signed document and slid it across the table. It was a formal apology. On HOA letterhead, signed by the board, admitting fault for the unauthorized use of my well for misrepresenting the water supply plan to residents and for failing to consult legal counsel before launching infrastructure projects. At the bottom was a note. We formally withdraw all prior demands regarding the deactivation of your private well and acknowledge your full legal rights as the sole owner and operator of the structure and its extensions. I did not touch it. He stood. I'll send the digital copy, he said, then hesitated at the door. I know this doesn't fix it. No, I replied, but it's a start. He left without another word. That evening, Samantha and I met with county officials. The Utilities Commission had opened an internal investigation. Several contracts issued by the HOA lacked proper permits, and 2 of the subcontractors had already been blacklisted from bidding on future city projects. We're not done, the lead investigator said. This kind of negligence doesn't just get brushed under the rug. There will be fines, maybe lawsuits. Do you need my full records, I asked. He nodded. Everything you have. I handed over the folder. Every blueprint, every flow rate log, every photo of tampered equipment. My documentation did not just clear my name, it became the foundation of the case against the HOA. The next week, the HOA issued a statement on the community forum, this time not hidden behind cheery design or vague legalese. It read, "We deeply regret the recent events that have disrupted water access in our neighborhood. We acknowledge that errors were made in the handling of infrastructure communication and resident rights. Effective immediately, an independent audit will be conducted, and resident representation on the board will be expanded." People did not clap. They did not celebrate. But the tone shifted. Neighbors began stopping by not to accuse, but to thank me. One woman brought a basket of oranges. A man offered to help repair the pump housing. A teenage girl whose family had gone without water for 3 days stood on my porch and simply said, "I'm sorry," not for her actions, but for how I had been treated. That meant more than any lawsuit ever could. The well kept running. The water flowed. And for the first time in years, it felt like Sycamore Ridge was breathing again. Not through forced compliance or glossy newsletters, but through honesty. Through consequence. Through a cold drink of truth. With Randall gone and the board fractured, the entire HOA structure stood on the edge of collapse. But I was not celebrating. Not yet. Because even after the apology, the resignations, and the sudden wave of public support, I knew that a mistake like this left a long legal shadow. And if we did not root it out completely, it would grow back like rot behind drywall. The county investigation had officially begun. Every document the HOA had filed for the past 5 years was being reviewed. Samantha was in contact with the city planner's office almost daily, and I was meeting twice a week with the interim utilities commissioner who had taken a sudden and personal interest in Sycamore Ridge. It was during one of those meetings that something unexpected surfaced. "There's a discrepancy in your land records," the commissioner said, tapping a weathered plat map with the back of his pen. "How so?" I asked, leaning forward over the large conference table in his office. "Your parcel lot, technically recorded as 1.2 acres, but when overlaid with the original homestead easements, it extends another 40 feet past your back fence. That stretch wasn't fully integrated into the HOA overlay when the subdivision was approved. You're telling me I own more land than they think I do?" He nodded. "Exactly. And that stretch, that's where they tried to lay their private line." I stared at the map. A thin rectangle ran along the greenbelt marked in light gray. Unclaimed on HOA development plans. Forgotten, maybe. But legally, it was mine. I sat back, my mind ticking. "They built on it," I said aloud. "They excavated, surveyed, poured concrete, all without knowing it wasn't theirs." The commissioner gave me a sharp look, which makes it a trespass. And if they laid anything permanent, it may qualify as encroachment, potentially even theft of use. Samantha nearly jumped when I called her on the way home. "You've got them by the throat now," she said. "This isn't about policy violations anymore. This is a hard property line. It's real estate law. If they built infrastructure on land they don't own, they're not just liable, they could be forced to remove it entirely, at their cost." And it got better. When we examined the HOA's bylaws, again this time, with fresh eyes, we discovered something almost poetic in Section 3A of their own charter. Under use of common property and easement assumptions, the language clearly excluded pre-HOA infrastructure not subject to contractual agreement. In other words, any utilities they did not own before incorporation could not be forcibly absorbed into the HOA system unless the owner agreed. And I never had. We scheduled a community meeting, this one not hosted by the board, but by the residents, held at the public library, neutral ground. Flyers went out, emails circulated, and for the first time in the neighborhood's history, a meeting happened without a single board member at the front of the room. Dana opened with an update on the audit, $94,000 spent in 8 months on unapproved utility improvements. No vote had ever occurred. A mother of 3 stood up and shared that her water pressure had fluctuated for weeks before the outage, and that her son had developed a rash the week of the sabotage, likely from sediment buildup when the system was compromised. Then Samantha took the stage. She projected the plat map onto a large whiteboard, her voice calm and clear. "This rectangle here," she said, pointing with a laser pen, "is private land. It was used by the HOA for unpermitted construction. Under county code, Mr. Harlan has every right to demand its removal and to file a claim for damages." The room buzzed. Someone raised their hand and asked what would happen to the pipes already buried there. Samantha did not flinch. "They'll either be dug up, rerouted, or formally purchased if Mr. Harlan agrees to it. But after what's been done, I wouldn't count on generosity." That night after the meeting, I walked the back fence line with a flashlight. I knew every inch of that ground, but now I saw it differently. Not as a buffer zone between me and the rest of the world, but as evidence. Legal ground long ignored, now reawakened with consequence. The next morning, I filed a formal notice of encroachment with the county assessor's office. By the end of the week, a cease and desist was delivered to the interim board. They called me the following Monday. The new acting president, a woman named Clarissa Hill, sounded nervous but sincere. "We want to make this right," she said. "Start by admitting what was done," I told her. "Then we can talk." They did. The next HOA-wide bulletin contained no smiling family photos, no colorful borders, just a simple typed letter to all residents of Sycamore Ridge. After a full review, and with guidance from legal counsel and the county utilities department, the board acknowledges the unauthorized use of private land and infrastructure belonging to Mr. Thomas Harlan. We regret our actions and the impact they have had on the community. Effective immediately, we are working to restore all systems, repair damage, and ensure all future development undergoes resident approval and external review. A week later, I stood at the edge of my back parcel and watched as crews, this time county-authorized and supervised, dug up the offending pipes and hauled them away section by section. Neighbors watched too from across their fences. Some waved, some did not. That was fine. I did not need apologies from everyone. Just honesty. Just acknowledgement. Jasper, my old golden retriever, sat beside me in the dirt as the last section of PVC was pulled from the ground. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fence line. "You see that boy?" I said, scratching behind his ears. "That's what it looks like when the truth finally shows up." He wagged his tail. I did not say it out loud, but in that moment, I knew they had built their system on a lie, and I had made them tear it out with their own hands. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came with a gentleness I had not felt in a long time. The morning sun crept through the lace curtains over my kitchen sink. Outside, the windmill turned lazily, in the breeze steady and familiar, its slow rotation powering the pump that brought water up from the aquifer I had relied on for nearly 2 decades. The same aquifer that had caused so much trouble, so much arrogance, denial, and loss, but had never once failed me. Now, after everything, the wellhead sat protected behind a new fence, steel reinforced, county certified, and paid for, ironically, by the very HOA that once tried to shut it down. They had settled. After weeks of negotiation, arbitration, and legal back and forth, Samantha had delivered the final terms with a quiet smile. They're not just folding, she told me they're asking for permission. The HOA agreed to a formal utility easement, a legal recognition that my system had served the neighborhood longer than their bylaws ever had. They acknowledged that the original infrastructure they had relied on for years was rooted in my private well, and that their attempt to bypass it had resulted in a community-wide failure. In writing, they admitted fault, and in settlement, they agreed to a 5-year maintenance and monitoring agreement overseen by the county, funded by the HOA's reserve budget, not by increasing resident dues. But the part that struck me most was not in the legal jargon. It was in the way they worded the apology, not just to me but to the community. We regret that in our efforts to modernize, we failed to respect the foundation already in place. We acknowledge the harm caused by our oversight and offer our gratitude to Mr. Harlan for preserving a system we didn't fully understand, one that supported our homes long before we did. It was not perfect, but it was honest. And in a world of HOA newsletters filled with hollow words and half-truths, that honesty meant something. After the settlement, things changed in quiet, unexpected ways. People who had once avoided eye contact now waved from their driveways. Greg from Lot 23 came by with a 6-pack and a clumsy apology. He did not say much, just dropped it off and muttered, "You were right," before heading back to his truck. Even Clarissa Hill, the interim president, made a point to stop by. She brought a mason jar of local honey and a stack of documents blueprints for future infrastructure projects, this time requesting my review before anything was approved. "We want you involved," she said. "No surprises, full transparency." It was not just the infrastructure that had changed. It was the culture. The HOA had learned painfully publicly that control did not equal wisdom, and that sometimes the quiet man at the edge of the neighborhood knows more than a dozen committee chairs. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch sanding a new wood bench when Dana Suarez walked up the gravel path with her 2 kids. "We're planting a community garden," she said. "The old tennis court's being converted. You interested?" I looked up. "A garden." She smiled. "We figured we should grow something real, together, not just rules and fees." I paused. "Only if we can hook it up to the well." She laughed. "That's why I'm asking you first." And so we did. By midsummer, the cracked concrete of the old court was gone, replaced by raised beds, irrigation lines, and wheelbarrows full of soil. Tomatoes, cucumbers, strawberries. Kids with dirt under their nails and sun on their faces. It felt right, organic, like something honest had finally taken root. And through it all, the well kept flowing. Samantha eventually closed my file and refused to send me a final bill. "Call it a favor," she said. "That, and I'd rather work pro bono for a man who stood up for himself the way you did than chase some HOA down for billing hours." Mark from the utilities office invited me to speak at a training session for new infrastructure inspectors. He wanted them to hear what happened here, how a neighborhood nearly collapsed because no one read the old maps. I agreed. I even brought the original PVC layout and unrolled it across the table like a general showing a battlefield. I never wanted to be the center of a fight. I just wanted to be left alone to tend my land, drink my water, and live quietly. But when the fight came to me, I stood. And when the dust cleared, I stayed standing. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but because it was my land, my well, my name on the permit. And now, finally, my story, once whispered through boardrooms and newsletters, had become part of something bigger. A reminder that beneath all the manicured lawns and matching shutters, there are real people. Real rights, and sometimes, just beneath the surface, a current of justice waiting to rise. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky gold, I walked the back property line with Jasper trotting beside me. The windmill creaked gently, the scent of fresh earth and blooming jasmine in the air. I paused at the edge of the field, where the HOA had once tried to bury their ambition beneath my soil. Now it was clear. Now it was mine. And it always had been.